First thing I have to ask you about. I saw this Game Informer article. In it, you said that you guys will not be talking about the darkness today.
Correct.
Which is, or in the game. Sorry, you will not be talking about the darkness in the game. And your explanation was, I believe, something about how it's like not time to reveal that, or you're focusing on something else. Correct? It was that. Tell me the truth. Is it because none of you have any idea what the darkness actually means?
I think that at a point, just totally candidly, we had no idea what it was. Okay. Straight up, we had no clue.
I'm glad you're being candid.
Yeah, we didn't know what it was, and we for a period. For a period, we chose we were going to lump all the races, and you see this in the tooltips in the game. Minions of the Darkness, and we had taken all the races and just said like, they'll just be the Darkness.
Okay.
But that's like not what the IP deserves. It's like literally not.
I'm glad you're admitting this.
And so what we're doing with Destiny 2 is we are deliberately telling a story about the light and what it means to be chosen. Okay. And as such, like, we're in the process of like removing the term darkness from the game.
I like
because
that.
when we are going to talk about darkness next, we need you to know what it is and have a plan for it, and we do.
Well, Destiny 2 didn't want to talk about the darkness, but how long did this embargo on talking about it last? Does it just mean the vanilla campaign? I'd argue to say we've seen hints of them in Destiny's recent entries. Hey everybody, it's your buddy Beard Grizzly, and I wrote this about a month ago. Well, probably longer, I think. I wrote it up before my break, in which I decided this would be my first video back, but it seems that the lore had other directions I felt I needed to go. We talked about the Drifter, and the Drifter, and the city, and the drift. Yeah, there's only so much of that I can take in a row, so I gotta split things up, you know? That said, I know we can probably speculate further with new information we've been given than what I kind of talk about here in this script, but I really don't want to split this episode up. I'm happy with the work I put into it, and I hope you guys will enjoy it as well. Also, Bungie sort of just added fuel to the fire with a recent developer insight video in which we see some stuff from the lore summed up pretty quickly. Darn, there goes my idea for a lore book summed up in 5 minutes series. Thanks, Bungie. Now, we could totally still do that, actually. Did want to play you guys a clip from there, however, so...
The Nine are interested in the survival of the solar system, and they believe that the role that Drifter is playing right now with Guardians in running Gambit and Gambit Prime is essential to the coming war against the darkness.
With that out of the way, let's get back on track. This is a big topic, and I want to respect your guys' time, but know that even Bungie is hinting further where we're headed. Keep that in the back of your mind this whole time. What you heard at the top of the show is an interview that happened back before Destiny 2 was released, around the same time as E3 back in 2017. From those wanting an exact date, it was June 15th, 2017. Within this interview from Jason Schreier and Luke Smith, we hear that Bungie wasn't very clear or knowledgeable on what the darkness even was at that time. Original statements were that the whole of the enemies we faced are minions of the darkness. This isn't what the Bungie guys wanted as the game went on, and so the story started to mold into something different. It's possibly why some story bits are contorted from fan theories, or that they still needed to figure out what was going on entirely. Obviously, it's a bit more of, well, both of these things, really. As a side note, if you guys want to hear the whole of the interview, I'll have a link for it in the description below. It's a bit older, but if you want all the reference material for where things start, that's pretty well your point zero. Still, with this in mind, of the darkness not being something Bungie is talking about within Destiny 2, then you may ask, Beard, why are we even, looking at this video or this topic? Why are we talking about the darkness when Luke has clearly said we're not going to? Well, that depends on your definition of Destiny 2 and where the next chapter begins. For me, personally, the next chapter begins with Forsaken. Heck, the main marketing material even says so, if I want to go that far. Destiny 2 had just big letters with the 2 behind it. That's easy enough. Both Curse of Osiris and Warmind, however, were in smaller letters, underneath that of the larger Destiny 2 logo. Then we get to Forsaken, and it's opposite. Forsaken is in huge letters, while Destiny 2 is there almost as a reminder, just to let you know that it's within the same universe, but it's still something completely different from what you've seen so far. Though I've yet to fully go into my thoughts on Forsaken, which, funny enough, is still relevant content to make because it still kind of unfolds week by week, I will say that it feels very different from the entirety of Destiny 2's Red War campaign or the lead up to it. I mean, minus the usual stuff of pointing and shooting at things, but you guys get what I mean, I guess. And if you're watching this, then I really assume you know what I mean. I don't want to just assume, but yeah. With marketing material from Bungie supporting my thoughts alone, even if loosely, let's get into what I even mean now that we're probably 3 minutes into this thing, or longer. Oh god, a lot longer. New year, new beard, right? Yeah, sure. Still the same rambling idiot. Though this is not the first piece of my thoughts on why we're dealing with the darkness already within our system, I feel that it's worthwhile bringing up and having as the centerpiece for our discussion today. Ulantan, warlock thinker and philosopher from the faction known as the Symmetry, has long been my favorite within the Destiny universe. The new physical grimoire that Bungie has released gave us another snippet from Ulantan himself, or from a disciple of his as a foreword for Chapter 2, entitled The Burden of Light. As I'm sure not everyone has this book, I want to read this part over for you all. If there is light, there also must be darkness. One reveals the other, tends it, carves it like marble to reveal a new shape. There is balance between them. Therefore, to understand the darkness, we study the light. Just as light is connected through space and time, so is the darkness. And just as the light has those who serve, who act as hands and heart and will, there are those who wield the dark in the same fashion. The light healed us, and so we have a responsibility to give it back the lives it has given us. There will be a day when we meet a new kind of guardian. Light and dark, power and weakness, guardian and guardian, symmetry. I will say that nothing says this is Ulantan or a disciple of his, but this is tough for me to think that anyone else would be saying something similar to this. Anyway, just a side note. As is somewhat alluded to here, the symmetry deals in the balance of light and dark. For one to exist, the other must as well, and for us to ultimately defeat the dark, our light must also be relinquished. It's a very similar idea in a lot of ways to the Vex ideas of convergence, which is kind of scary in a way. Still, I guess Ulantan's ideas wouldn't involve giving up our individuality, but instead cohabitation with each other. Maybe. Or Ulantan was an agent for the Vex the whole time. Oh boy. At our basest, what things allow a Guardian to really stand out? What does our enemies see us as? Well, some old Grimoire cards showcase us as being a bunch of silly dancy pants show-offs, like several of the Cabal reports that we've seen from Mars, or even from the DFA of recent within the Infinite Forest on Mercury. Here, we see how we transmet in, take a few pot shots, wipe out a group of our enemies and their allies, then drive off in our Sparrows after we've had a little celebration. We're in, we're out, we're off to the next activity. Bungie has seemingly taken our general actions as players as canon within the game's universe. Kind of adds to the general idea of what we've seen recently with the Nine's invitations as well, and also the Skull of Dire Ahamkara that we kind of talked about before. So, kind of follows suit. We've also seen this in the entry called Savin. The one from the Dreaming City book, by the way, not the one from Ghost Stories. Bungie, could you maybe name them different? Thanks. While there's a lot that's brought to light for us within this entry, what we're concerned with is the nature of Savin, after his being turned from the scientist he seemingly was in the Gobi Desert, or breadbasket, as it's listed in the entry itself. Savin originally planted a bunch of small radiation sensors to monitor the progression of this area, though little is known of what's going on with it. Perhaps a re-desertification, maybe the Traveler's powers waning in that area. Something else to look into. The part most interesting to us, however, is this. Savin, the Guardian, showed a tremendous fondness for doing things. He had a pathologically task-oriented nature, which made him very useful to the Reef. Yet there was always the sense that his ghost was watching, observing, reporting. And Savin was most of all greedy, not in the grasping manner of the petty, but in an enamorous, all-consuming way, for he desired materials and experiences that would temper him into a better guardian. and he was always experimenting with his strange powers in foolish ways that left him briefly dead, seeking a new super ability or some way to make my grenades faster. He grew tired of performing trivial tasks about the reef, complaining that the dangerous repairs he had were endless and boring, and he wanted to move on to new worlds. He leapt into space, repeatedly and without reason, as if his death were no more traumatic than a hop off a curb. Obsessed with reward and efficiency, he would rather do one profitable thing 1,000 times than waste his efforts on a less beneficial novelty. Now, why does this bother me? Remember the ideas of what a guardian is as we go forward and how others see us. Think of yourself and your actions as you go along in the game or when you had time with it, if you ever did. And if you never did, then, well, one, thanks for watching this video that you probably are completely lost in. But think about how you would play other titles and how it doesn't always align with the actions of other NPCs within the world. In another entry that we've been given in Forsaken, again, noting why I feel that time is important to remember why the next chapter for Destiny is upon us, we see an entry entitled Bamberga, also from the book The Dreaming City. There are two very weird instances that happen around the reef, specifically around the asteroid of 2 Pallas. It is the third largest asteroid within the main asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. Pallas is named after a Greek titan by the same name. It was given this name in 1802 by Heinrich Wilhelm Olbers. Just to round out this history lesson, Pallas is said to be the titan of Warcraft. Anyway, we might know Pallas from several other entries, in particular dealing with the Siege of Pallas, which was a battle during the Reef Wars. The short story is the Awoken were victorious over the Fallen, who had amassed a sizable force to attack this asteroid station. This was done after the Queen stepped in to defend us on planet Earth. There are several entries that recount the tale, but for the sake of time, we're going to focus on Bamberga in particular, which really has nothing to do with the Reef War, or so we imagine. Just wanted to bring up that Pallas has a rather storied history. While I do feel the name of the entry is inconsequential, I do want to talk a little bit about it. 324 Bamberga is another asteroid within the main belt. It was discovered in 1892 by Johann Palisa. That said, it's important to realize it's another asteroid, and may have been the destination for these logs and where they went to that we're about to reference. Not necessarily, of course, where everything had happened, so keep that in mind. For me, that's as far as the name goes. It's also apparently a pretty common error code in Call of Duty, but that has no place in Destiny anymore, now does it? Alright, digs at Activision aside, let's look at this entry before I get too far off track. Again. The top portion of this entry is somewhat telling. There are a lot of incidents that have occurred in the same manner as those on Pallas, so really the tale doesn't end with just what we're going to talk about here. Keep that in mind. Pallas are the only entries we really hear of in this entire entry. Meanwhile, there are 5 that may have occurred around 4 Vesta itself, and another around 7 Eris. These incidents are marked as SBU Aphelion, and though I'm unsure if they mean SBU as the general definition term I was able to find, being Strategic Business Unit or not, I'm highly doubtful of this, by the way, it leaves the word Aphelion hanging around. The definition here is the point where a planet or body is furthest from the sun. Kind of a weird relationship on that one. I mean, it's almost like the point furthest from the sun could be the point furthest from the light, which would mean the dark. Oh, granted, that takes the definition a bit literally, but what comes from these entries is just adding on to the fire at this point. Within the first incident report, we see a familiar name, Nulg. Pavel Nulg, or at least I assume it's the same one as we don't have a listing for another Nulg being in service to the Queen, is a paladin of the Awoken Royal Guard. I'll read off the good bits here and explain in a bit. Information received APR 09-18T022945+0000 from Paladin Nulg, considered sober, dependable, not a fantasy. Nulg reported a glowing creature on external of his ship, Retribution, moments before routine NLS jump. Retribution FDR showed Rad Spike 5 Sigma on TEPC, CPDS, and RAM. CPD showed no effect. On recommendation of K. Wajed, Nolg was quarantined under Techioon supervision for 1 month. Retribution decommissioned, sent adrift beyond Reef. SOE-1 Paladin Nolg is reported seeing a glowing creature on his ship, the Retribution. After being impounded and tested, the ship was sent adrift outward from the reef and never looked at again. Nolg was also sent into quarantine for a month by Kelda Wajed. For those keeping track of time, this is key. Kelda was originally the head or one of the heads of the Techioons before she turned into the Oracle, which we visit each week after gathering the offering from the quest in the Dreaming City. This would mean this happened during or before the Dreaming City's foundation, which is still, seemingly, a very large amount of time. I'm not going to dig too deeply into the acronyms within this page, since they could mean completely different things versus the definitions I've been able to find, but suffice to say, several possible groups are able to find cause to send the Retribution out adrift. The 5 Sigma quotation is quite probably linked to the scientific probability to being within a very close margin of being right each and every time whenever a test is conducted in the same merit. Think about you calling heads or tails on a coin. Should technically be 50-50, right? Well, toss the coin 1 million times and see how right you are. Whatever the chances of it being 50-50 might show how on point you are.
Heads.
Or tails.
Come on, let me through. Heads.
Or tails.
Heads. Told you. I never find that as satisfying as I'd imagined.
Chin up. There's always next time.
I suppose there is.
That's effectively what was done here to carry on how sure they were of radiation. It's actually very important as we get into the second part of this entry, but just remember, it also means there's a chance things could be completely wrong. Oh, applied science and probability. The second part of this entry goes over the station called Amestris. If you're curious about the history of this woman, well, I'm not going to talk about it here. I like the channel being around. She's a pretty brutal queen of Xerxes of Persia. That's where I'll leave it. There are only a few of these distress calls I want to go over, but remember that that's what they are. Distress calls. After each distress call, we see a notation of static follows. Generally, this would indicate that comms connection has given out from the sending or receiving side of a channel, which may be what happened here. Could also be due to some additional types of interference, namely, well, we talked about radiation, right? Let's skip ahead a bit. A SAR fleet found that the Amestris was unsafe to board due to radioactive surface contamination. SAR deployed multiple Crow drones for interior survey. No evidence of hull breach was found. No evidence of Maltech detonation was found. No evidence of hostile alien interference was found. No evidence of internal sabotage was found. No survivors were found. Amestris abandoned, set adrift beyond reef. SAR could mean suspicious activity report, but that's a guess. Again, fantasy world's fantasy lingo. Everything about the Amestris was unsafe, but nothing seemed to indicate a type of scenario that would make it such. Maltech would mean bad or evil technology, which may lead back to some of the radiation bits. This is brought up in the Mara Senna, and for time I won't dig into this too far. The only major hint that we're left with is from a distress call by Ben Assar on board the Amestris. T5. Mayday, Mayday. This is Ven Assar on the RSS Amestris. We are 300 souls aboard. Something is happening. Everything is blue. Something is here. Static follows. The assumption made by a couple others on board was that they faced a hull breach and something had boarded the Amestris. While we've figured out that there was no hull breach, I'm inclined to agree on the something boarded idea, thanks to the previous report of a creature that seemed to be on the outside of the hull of the Retribution that was also glowing. The trouble is we're unsure what color this creature might have been glowing from Nolg's report, but that it was glowing still gives me a thought. There are a few different types of radiation, most of which aren't noticeable by the naked eye. One way that we've been able to observe radiation, however, is within nuclear power plants. Fusion rods are dunked into water to ensure they stay cool, along with several other reasons. But where water is generally seen as clear, as I'm sure many of you have seen with your drinking water, okay, I hope all of you have seen with your drinking water, the water around these rods is seen with a blue tint. This radiation type is labeled as Cherenkov radiation. To keep the process as simple as I can, the reason for this blue tint is thanks to particles crashing into each other. Fusion rods give off energy from the splitting of atoms and molecules, which then leads to this energy colliding with water, which is also a chemical. The reason is thanks to water being denser than what the energy from the fusion rods is able to easily pass through, and this causes friction in these two forms of energy, thus you get the blue tint. In case I lost anyone, the water's blue because of two forces colliding with one another. That's at simplest and basest form. Another major example of this would be the Large Hadron Collider in Switzerland. We actively look for how particles can interact with one another and create connections or sparks. You know, all the while playing with things that can make us all go boom! Sounds fun. Before I forget to mention it, one thing I did notice was the possible dates listed within both of these entries. Your guess is as good as mine as to why both of these events happened in April, one being April 9th XX18 and the other being April 10th XX27. But in scrounging and getting some help, I'm going with the possible thought that total solar eclipses may be a big reason for this. If there are points where the traveler is cut off from the sun's light and blocked, so to speak, perhaps this allowed these creatures to move freely back into our space? As it stands, something is still keeping them at bay from harrowing us any more than what they had in the collapse. If you're wondering why I'm talking about radiation within water when we're looking into space in the reef, well, Cherenkov radiation has been seen occurring in vacuum scenarios as well. In this case, something is traveling at faster speeds than what is intended by lightspeed travel, or something akin, and as soon as it collides with something that could stop or slow it down, this causes that thing to slow down and possibly produce this blue tint. In other words, fast things getting slowed down create a blue tint, which is just about as fast as you can go without going violet. Or plaid. Maybe plaid. Just think about the color spectrum for this one. Ultraviolet radiation comes to mind, for instance. Anyway, I mostly just explained why the things might go blue to begin with, but it may actually not matter in the long run. What we're dealing with here is something that's much tougher to pin down than modern science may be able to explain. It may not even refer to modern science at all in the long run, but I'd like to think that the basis for this thing happening is found within the Cherenkov process. Again, basis, not full explanation. In addition, we're told that the Hive use something akin to science, and we even see the sisters of Ir Halak and Iranuk give up some science talk in a conversation with Oryx, who quickly tells them to speak in the royal tongue, or he'll pretty much lob their heads off. They still look into effects on our universe, just as we do. Aside from this, we see a mention that the hull may have been breached, but of course we find out that that's not the case on the Amestris, and of this core that possibly runs the station, called the Stalking Core. Could be that whatever is linked to these beasts showing up is thanks to this type of technology. Could be that it's a beacon of some kind, or a portal, or something else entirely. The same technology may have been employed on the Retribution, but that's also unknown. There are few details aside from people going poof, some 300 or so members at that, and the possibility of a creature or creatures, all of which seem to have disappeared entirely, leaving no damage to the Amestris or Retribution, except for leaving a load of radiation in its wake and a bunch of missing people. Could also be possible that these are just Scorn jumping in and out of the station itself, but to our knowledge, there is no radiation left over from the jumping that they do into locations. Plus, around this time period, I don't believe the Scorn were a threat at all just yet, with Uldren still being planted firmly in the reef itself, which is why we referenced the building of the Dreaming City and the creation of the Oracle, which led to the loss of Keldawajt. Again, I doubt heavily it is the Scorn. The Amestris is also sent outward from the reef for being unsafe, but I wonder back to an old Dead Orbit story of the Sophia in A113. I wonder if there's a link there at all, and why the Awoken needed to protect this station as they did against the Dead Orbit scavengers. Still, let's get back on track. Hi there, this is present me talking to the past me, and I just wanted to say, yes, there's a link. Kind of. It's sort of open to interpretation, though, but there's definitely a link. Boy, typed this up a while back, and it seems like I was on the right track even back then. Anyway, back to past me. Between the codename used of Aphelion, being the point furthest from the light of a sun, and the showing of creatures that can inhabit space or bring about the end of races within our solar system with radiation to boot, along with a small reference in the Books of Sorrow calling out a moon being pelted with radiation by Savathun and her forces. Well, this is possibly a showing of reliance on dark side tactics, or tactics that are not quite sanctioned by groups that would facilitate light or life in the least. I was content with my theory until there, but it seems I was meant to wait to present this one to you all thanks to a portion of the Black Armory papers. One of the only major accounts that we've seen thus far of the collapse and what had happened in the early days of it all coming down. We see the author, Henriette, pen what had happened to the Black Armory. 2 entries spring to mind. Entry 68. They are here. They are real. I can't believe we were so right and so wrong. To think that we could stop this. To say we were naive would be an understatement. We simply didn't know. Their power, their strength. It's insurmountable. As they draw closer, all we can do is hide and hope that the facility doors will be strong enough. It's utter chaos out there. Too many put their faith in the Traveler. I don't know what sort of answers people expect from a gigantic ball in the sky. It remains silent as always. At least I'm with her. Being with family is what matters in the end. There is no more hope, only the screams of humanity. Entry 71. Last night, we awoke in the middle of the night to the sound of something pounding on the walls. It roared and stomped and howled in frustration, until it found the doors. They didn't hold. I never saw it. We were too occupied, blindly firing around a corner. I just remember the smell of wet earth and a sound I've never heard before, like a machine being stretched and then compressed. When it was over, we'd lost members of our Black Armory family, and the thing, whatever it was, got away. I lost one of my sisters, Helga. We had our problems, but she was right about so many things. I know that now. I wish I could have told her. Henriette never gets a look at the monster, but she recounts the few pieces she can. Another such account we can look to is that of Cade 6. He claims within his journal entitled Treasure Island, there's no bounty, no hive. I'm out in plain sight. The sky is torn open and there's nothing and nobody left in this ruined world but me and the boiling shadow all around. Whatever it is hits me before I can level my gun. Doesn't matter. Tendrils of pain crawl over my splayed fingers, my outstretched arm, my shoulders, my neck, my screaming mouth as it consumes. I'm being enveloped. Everything is wrong. Primordial. My systems go sideways. All but my sensors. It wants me to witness this. The world. There's also a couple photos linked with this entry as well, which are just sketches from a corrupt perspective of Cade, being that he's recounting exo-memories, but a perspective nonetheless that seems to be fitting with other accounts. For the better part of the last year, we've seen some hints and proddings at this overall theory. The darkness never really left, but they've been interested in what's happening in our solar system regardless of the Traveler being around or not. That we're starting to see more thoughts and ideas based around who or what the darkness may be, well, for me it's becoming more clear. If anything, I also know this mirrors theories online for a bit now, but the new signs are worth looking over, especially now that Destiny 2 is in its 2nd chapter. But as I said, these are just hints of the darkness. Not necessarily what we'll see when all's said and done. And of course, it's also still just my perspective and my speculation. I think that's about where I'll leave things for now. As it stands, we have no definitive markings of what the darkness are, or even what could be their ultimate goal, or, well, much else. That we may have some of these things to go by is a bit of the storytelling that I would love to see develop further, or to open up to allow for more answers. But now, the question is left to you. Do you think I'm on the right track with this? Have you seen other mentions of the darkness throughout your readings, research, and exploration out in the world? Doesn't matter if it's on Earth, the small moon of Io, or the distant centaur of Nessus. Anywhere could hold a further hint of what we're looking for. Anyway, you guys know the buttons to press to tell me quickly if you enjoyed this deep dive into theories, links, and possible inspirations that could explain hints of the darkness. I appreciate you letting me have some fun and explain my theories in full. Hopefully you at least learned something from a different perspective thanks to my crazy mind thinking up connections that probably don't even exist. In either event, no matter where or when you are, I'll see you next Spacetime. Take care.